What's up, friends? Hope you're having a fantastic day. In this video, I've got a brand new 27.5 rear wheel that we're going to try out. I've had my Rocky Mountain Altitude for, I don't know, 8 or 9 months now, and I've had it in a dual 29er setup this whole time, but this bike is compatible with a smaller rear wheel. So I've got a brand new carbon 27.5 rear wheel from Crank Brothers. So yeah, this bike's been pretty sick, pretty amazing enduro bike. It's great at a lot of things, not so great at some other things. I've got a full review of this bike that I dropped not too long ago that you can check out. But in the upcoming weeks, I just want to test the smaller rear wheel and see if that helps with some of the things that I've been struggling with on this bike. Because the bike is so long and so stable, it is kind of a beast to whip around and turn. And I'm hoping that the smaller rear wheel will help with some playfulness and maybe improve my cornering a little bit. And improve my ability to kind of place that rear wheel where I want it. Thanks for watching. Here we go. So the upcoming thoughts that I'm going to give on a smaller rear wheel are based on my bike, right? But just keep that in mind that, when I'm talking about pedaling efficiency, descending, maneuverability, these thoughts are based on my experience specifically with this Rocky Mountain Altitude. However, I think a lot of these characteristics of a smaller rear wheel are going to apply to a lot of bikes out there, but your experience may differ depending on, what type of bike you're riding. So let's talk about ride feel and descending with the smaller rear wheel. A lot of these trails you'll see have a lot of roots and rocks and stuff, and so I did notice that the smaller rear wheel didn't quite roll over all of that stuff as smoothly as the 29-inch rear wheel, or maybe would get a little more deflected and not stay on line quite as good. But there's so many tight twists and turns in a lot of these trails that I ride, and so I feel like there were definitely some benefits there. The first thing I noticed is that the bike, especially the rear end of the bike, definitely felt a little more agile. That smaller rear wheel helps me maneuver and place the bike a little bit better. Cornering felt better. It felt like I was able to whip around the turns a little easier. And I've never been the best at cornering, and especially on a long bike like this, I think that the smaller rear wheel can help with that, just to get in and out of turns quicker and maneuver and place the rear wheel where I want it. One of the areas that I noticed the biggest difference with this smaller rear wheel was in tight, twisty, S turns, when you've got to make a right, left really quickly. Actually, I'll show you this clip right here where the very first time I experienced that and felt that difference, I let out a little whew, because I was excited with how awesome that felt to just be able to twist and maneuver the bike a little bit easier. And here's another section here, just kind of tight, twisty, right, left, and being able to make those quick turns a little easier was awesome. It felt really cool. So in general, I'm not the best at cornering, and that was one of the main reasons I wanted to try the smaller rear wheel, especially on a bike like this that's so long and stable. It can be a beast at times to whip in and out of turns. So this was something that was immediately noticeable, was that in tight turns, I was able to push harder into the turn, and it felt like I wasn't waiting quite as long for that rear wheel to come around before I exited the turn. So when it comes to getting airborne, the smaller rear wheel definitely is a little more maneuverable, and just, I guess, a slight decrease in weight makes it easier to whip around too. I also noticed it was easier to get that front end up with the smaller rear wheel when I wanted to pop a wheelie or manual for a little section. So if you're into jumping and jibbing and manualing, then I think a smaller rear wheel is the right choice for you. I'm not super into that stuff. I mainly enjoy single track trail riding and free riding stuff, but definitely some advantages to be found with that smaller rear wheel. The smaller rear wheel also means that there's more space for my butt, so when leaning back on steep technical trails or maneuvering the bike, I just have a little more space. Even with the 29-inch rear wheel, I didn't buzz my butt on the tire that much, so that's not a huge deal, but I think when I'm doing more free ridey days and rock slabs, going down something super steep, I think having that little extra clearance for my butt will be nice. So, first ride is done on the new 27.5 rear wheel, and honestly, I'm super impressed. I do feel like my cornering and maneuverability was a little better than usual. When it comes to rolling speed, I do think I noticed a little bit more hanging up on rocks and roots and stuff with the smaller rear wheel, but
This bike is so plush and the suspension design is fantastic, and so I think it kind of erases a lot of that. But yeah, so far I'm not really seeing any drawbacks to sticking with the smaller rear wheel.
So when it comes to wheel weight, in general, the larger the wheel, the more it weighs, and the larger the tire on the wheel, the more it's going to weigh. So yes, a 27.5 rear wheel is going to be a touch lighter. It's not usually a significant amount of weight. For example, I use Crank Brothers wheels, so I've got a Synthesis Carbon 27.5 wheel and a 29-inch wheel. The 27.5 wheel weighs 1,025 grams, and the 29-inch wheel weighs 1,060 grams. So that's a difference of 35 grams, which is pretty minimal. But then you add the tire. So I'm using the Schwalbe Albert Gravity Radial Pro tire. In the 27.5, it weighs 1,245 grams, and a 29-inch tire weighs 1,330 grams. So yeah, with the 27.5 rear wheel and tire, it's like 120 grams lighter, which is not a ton, but that is rotating weight, and so it can be noticeable. I mean, I do feel like when pedaling, that rear wheel accelerates just a little bit quicker. So yeah, if you're, really a weight weenie, then that might be important to you. But yeah, to me, like 100 grams of weight difference, I don't really think that swapping to a smaller rear wheel simply for the weight difference alone is going to be worth it. So let's talk about pedaling efficiency. In general, 29-inch wheels being bigger means that they roll over obstacles a little more easily. And in my experience, they also maintain their momentum a little better. So once you're up to speed, you don't have to work quite as hard to keep it going. So yeah, when I had the 29-inch rear wheel on this bike, it obviously climbed great in a straight line. The bike just hugs the ground. The suspension design is very sensitive. But when going around like tight, twisty turns, it did feel a bit cumbersome at times. And so I think the smaller rear wheel improves that a little bit, just being able to turn on the spot while climbing uphill. Yeah, overall, just I noticed when climbing a little less efficient. But for somebody like me who doesn't really care about being the fastest uphill, I think that's fine. Honestly, I didn't notice a huge drop in my climbing times, and so I haven't seen this as a huge downside up to this point.
All right, we're doing a little more 27.5 rear wheel testing today. Trying out the MULLET setup. We've got some slippery, wet, steep conditions here, so see how that rear wheel hooks up. Getting really steep here. Nice. Smaller rear wheel. It's pretty cool. One thing I noticed is that on those really, really steep sections, I felt like I could get my weight further back when I needed to. Like sink my butt down, lower my center of gravity better, just because the wheel wasn't gonna skim me in the butt. So that's kind of a nice thing for really steep stuff like that. Also, the rear wheel felt just a little more maneuverable when I wanted to pick it up and place it. So yeah, let's do some more testing on this rear wheel.
So yeah, to sum it up, in my experience, the smaller rear wheel on the Rocky Mountain altitude has felt a little more nimble, a little more playful. It's easier to corner, easier to manual and wheelie. Some of the downsides is that it doesn't feel quite as efficient pedaling or climbing, but it is more maneuverable on the climbs through rocks and roots. Another downside is that, when you're trying to carry speed really fast in a straight line over rocks and roots, it can get, pushed offline a little bit easier, fall into holes and not just roll over stuff as easily as the larger rear wheel would. So I think it really just kind of depends on what type of rider you are, what type of trails you ride. In my case, I love single track enduro style trails, anywhere from like difficult blue to double black diamond trails. And so for now, I'm going to stick with the smaller rear wheel and give it a go. I think for this altitude that's so long, I've really liked the benefits that the smaller rear wheel provides. I also feel like one of my main weaknesses when it comes to racing is cornering, and so as most racers know, you can lose a lot of time in the corners, and so I think for me, I'm going to stick with that smaller rear wheel and see if that helps with my cornering. I did notice the other day that I rode NOTG, which is a fantastic black diamond trail at Tiger Mountain, and I've ridden this trail probably 20 or 30 times over the past few years, and I actually set a PR with this smaller rear wheel. So that was pretty surprising. That smaller rear wheel helps me maneuver and place the bike a little bit better, and for me that made a decent amount of time difference. So yeah, for me, I'm going to stick to that smaller rear wheel for a while and just kind of see how it goes this year. I do think there is a little bit of hype here around this mullet setup. If you like your current setup with 29-inch wheels, then don't switch, but if you're like me and wanting to get a little more playfulness and maneuverability out of your bike, then it might be a good way to go. Anyways, that about wraps up my thoughts. If you have other thoughts on a mullet versus 29er setup, please let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your experiences and which setup you prefer. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.